Welcome to the Drop the Needle podcast, your backstage pass to the mystical realm. I'm your host, Jim Alstott, and here, gifted souls step up to the mic sharing their spiritual journey. We're hitting the high notes and the low notes of their awakening, creating a symphony of enlightenment. This isn't just another interview show. This is where divine insights are channeled and universal truths are revealed. So crank up your stereo and sit back, because who knows, this just might help you compose the next transformative chapter of your soul's purpose. Are you ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Drop the Needle podcast. I'm your host, Jim Alstott, and I'm so happy you all decided to join us. What if I told you today's guest has 660 peer-reviewed scientific publications proving she can create transformative changes at the cellular and atomic level? Dahryn Trivedi is an enlightened master whose work with divine blessings is recognized by Harvard, MIT, and over 2,000 universities worldwide. She's literally bridging the gap between hardcore science and spirituality, showing that divine connection isn't just woo-woo, it's measurable, producible, and changing lives. Are you ready to explore how consciousness meets quantum reality? I know I am, so let's dive on in. I would like to welcome Dahryn Trivedi to the show. Welcome, Dahryn.
Thank you, Jim. Happy to be here. So happy.
Well, you know what? I am so excited about this, and I wasn't kidding in the opener. It is quite impressive, and your background is too. It's really interesting having read your bio. Why don't you do us all a little favor here and tell everyone about yourself as well as your organization?
Absolutely. Well, our organization is essentially it's a spiritual organization, but also a very scientific organization. So what we're doing is we're essentially taking science and proving that divine consciousness is real, that consciousness is real. Consciousness is the thing that really connects science, spirituality, and religion. It's the one unifying theme between all three of them. And so if we can prove that consciousness is real, we can advance science and its current limitations. We can advance religion and spirituality and transform all of humanity as we know it. We can evolve our potential and address our most pressing problems that we see today by simply addressing things at the level of consciousness. And that's what we've seen replicated in all of our scientific studies. We are perhaps the largest evidence-based spiritual organization in the world, meaning that we have over 6,000 science experiments, and it's conducted over life sciences, material science, agriculture. We have clinical trials. And like you said, we have over 670 peer-reviewed publications available in over now 3,000 universities worldwide. And that includes like Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, MIT. It's also at the National Institutes of Health, as well as even the US government. And our studies span over 130 countries, 1,600 universities of which are in the United States. And what we've seen over all of these scientific studies, these experiments we've conducted, is that these aren't the nature of consciousness has for so long been a philosophical or theoretical discussion. It's been primarily limited to that realm of understanding. And every sector where we talk about science, religion, or spirituality, we have our own different understanding about consciousness, right? Science says consciousness is produced by the mind. Religion and spirituality say consciousness is actually fundamental. Religion says consciousness is the soul. Spirituality says consciousness is the fundamental reality that controls and regulates our lives, right? You even have scientists like Max Planck, quantum physicist, real physicist as well, who said that he considered consciousness as fundamental and that matter was derivative of consciousness, but nobody outside of what we have done in our organization, our nonprofit, has been able to prove scientifically, has been able to conduct regular, repeatable experiments proving this fact that everything else is a derivative of consciousness. And when you alter consciousness, you alter things at even the material level. And so we are taking that and we are, creating real, measurable, reproducible results. We've seen changes at the molecular level, at the atomic and biological levels. We've seen changes in seeds and crops and yield and immunity. We've seen changes in bacteria, viruses, microbes. We've seen things in human health, clinical trials. We've seen things in matter change. We've seen actual materials change. We've seen physical constants, and we've seen things that are considered physical laws that we cannot bypass or go beyond or alter because of the impact of our scientific experiments. So, but what I will say is at the center of this work is the application of divine blessings. And this is not like a symbolic act of faith. It's not like a priest or somebody giving a blessing. It's more like that's the process of it. But what it really is, it's coming from enlightened consciousness, somebody who has that strength of connection to the divine, somebody who is connected 24/7, whose prayers are basically, reasonable prayers, so we'd like to say, are heard by the divine
I want to win the
and
lottery.
answered.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And as a result, when these prayers are answered, what they do is they alter things at the level of consciousness. So you are now the recipient of that blessing, or that prayer is now connected to that source, that authority. And through that connection, right, the recipient experiences an altered state at the level of consciousness, meaning their consciousness raises, they evolve in consciousness, and that creates ripples into every other aspect of their life, whether it be mental health, physical health, or it be things at the molecular and atomic levels change. And so all of that happens by simply altering things at the level of consciousness.
And so that's where what you're saying, I know the frequently used phrase of mind, body, spirit, that's what you're saying, this impacts everything like in a holistic manner, correct?
Absolutely everything. We've seen it. I don't feel like across all of our 6,000 experiments, I'll put it this way, across all of our 6,000 experiments in life sciences, material science, and clinical trials, we have not had a single experiment where we have failed to see an outcome. We had an experiment where we did a blessing on a petri dish, which had cancer cells mixed with non-cancerous cells. And this was done with Dr. Garrett Yunt at the California Pacific Medical Research Institute in California. And what he found was that when the blessing was, administered, the treatment was administered to this petri dish with these mixed sample of cancer cells and non-cancerous cells, the energy with just one blessing, right? The energy knew how to treat each one differently. It treated the cancer cells by killing them off, right? Destroying the cancer cells. And it knew that for the healthy cells, it must promote their viability. It must, increase their health and increase their vitality. So it knew how to treat each one differently. And we see the same thing when we bless people and with our clinical trials. Well, our clinical trials are double-blind, placebo-controlled, and randomized. So we don't know who we're blessing. It's remote as well. So we're not even in the laboratory with the volunteers. We're literally sitting in the United States, and the volunteers are located, on the other side of the world in like India. And so we're treating these people. We don't know who's getting what blessing. We have a control group, a placebo group, and this blessed group. And then even the investigators, right? So there's no confirmation bias or anything from their side. Even they don't know who's getting the blessing versus who's getting the placebo, the fake blessing, and who's part of the control. It's all randomized. We don't know their names, their problems, nothing about them. And with just one blessing to the entire group of people, right? We're talking like well over 100 people per clinical trial. We've done several clinical trials in the blessed group specifically. Every single one of them is treated differently. We have people who everybody has like severe mental and emotional health problems. That's one of the requirements for the clinical trial. We want people who have very clear, severe levels,
Type
right?
of
Yeah, like
illnesses.
PTSD, like,
Right.
ADD, ADHD, anxiety, depression, people who have like severe issues with relationships, people who have like, menstrual cycle disorders, chronic health problems. And we're not just taking psychological, analysis, whereas a lot of, these clinical trials are limited to when we end up in like the spiritual or the metaphysical,
Right.
is most of them are limited to psychological, questionnaires or very trivial parameters. We're measuring things like the clotho-protein, right? Which even conventional science has not found to have any treatment that can increase it by more than a marginal of a percentage. So we've seen increases by much as almost 700% in some of our clinical trials. We've seen things like neurotransmitters increase that you don't see short of direct administration of those neurotransmitters like oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, things
Gotcha.
like that. Without any administration, right, we're seeing like hundreds of percentages of increase in these neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters that, essentially give you that feeling of well-being, of health, of vitality, of a sense of peace and calm and serenity, ability to focus, acetylcholine, right? The chief neurotransmitter that gives you the control and command over all the other neurotransmitters within your body, right? We're seeing things change at like hormonal levels. There is no treatment that can activate, right, the hormonal system within the body that can regulate it properly. We can have influences over hormonals
Hmm.
or over hormones by taking
Suppression or boost.
supplements,
Right.
but we can't create, well, there's no drug that regulates the entire endocrine system. And we've seen that. We've seen the entire endocrine system behave differently because of the blessing. We've seen changes in insulin. We've seen changes in nutrient absorption and bioavailability. So people, without changing their diet, without eating anything differently, they're absorbing greater amounts of nutrients from their food, right? We're seeing huge changes across all these different blood parameters, as well as the matching psychological evaluations that show nearly 100% improvement in all of their, problems that they had before they received the treatment and after. And
And
then,
I
I
was
mean,
just
huge.
going to ask you something if I can,
Yeah.
because what you're saying, the information that you're giving is overwhelming in a good way, in a very good way. Miraculous, it might be a better phrase or term to use. But I have a question for you, and I'm sure you get asked this frequently, so I'm sorry if it's redundant. Why? Why did you start this? And why are you doing this? What's your end goal in all of this work that you're doing and all of these things that you're doing for, let's just say, humanity, the world?
I think that is a very potent question. And in fact, like, the thing that still pushes us to this day, because when we really get to the why, we're looking at a worldwide systems failure. That's the why. This is true work at a humanitarian level, at a worldwide level, at a very essential and mandatory level. We cannot survive as a species, as a society, without this. And I'll explain to you why. So
Please, please do.
if we look at, okay, let's see the journey of science and religion, because one of the missions of this nonprofit organization, it's called Divine Connection International, in
Hmm.
case I haven't mentioned it before. It's the main purpose and mission, right, is not only to prove, right, that consciousness is real, but it's also to integrate, to unify, right, science and religion. Because what we see is with religion, right? Religion has, gone from a point in which it was absolutely necessary for us at one point in time. It
Right.
was almost a point in time where every single person was a part of religion. And now it's like a lot of people have left religion and joined science. And they're
Yes.
treated as two distinctly separate categories with no commonality between the two. And I know some scientists and some, religious people will disagree and say there are commonalities, but nothing has really been proven between the intersection of the two to
Other
show
than
that they're the
arguments,
same.
there's arguments over that because where's the proof? Where's the proof? Because science is proof based versus religion being faith based.
Yes. I mean, science needs something to measure. It works with objective reality. It works with measurable things. Its sole purpose is to watch and witness and identify phenomena and then figure out how to harness it and use it for our benefit. That's essentially what science does. It observes, it measures, and then later, when it's able to figure out the mechanism by which things work, harness it for our benefit.
Hmm.
And so, and that's another reason why humanity has left religion, because when science is absent from religion, when religion denies fundamental truths of reality, right, it starts to fail the needs of human needs, right? It
Right.
starts to fail us. It starts to either, psychologically manipulate us. It starts to trick us. It's the realm of pseudoscience and trickery or dogma and ritual and practice. We get bored, we get overwhelmed, right? There's a lot of effort, no outcome. And, there are
Yes.
so many times in which, even when there is, people who claim to have things that are miraculous out there that can really do great things, sometimes they actually harm us. They are detrimental to our health, right?
Yeah.
Even the people who promote it might even believe it's good for you, but the science says otherwise. But science can't cross that territory anymore, because now it's devoid of science. So science can't enter that realm. So now there's this huge issue with the integrity of religion and spirituality. So that's the first part, is we lack integrity now. We're so focused on process and dogma that we've lost the sight of outcome in our lives. And integrity,
I
of course,
agree.
is a big
Yes.
thing. And then the other side of that is science. So science, I like to say science is actually the newest religion of the world. And there's a good reason for that. So a lot of people have joined science as a religion, so to speak. And the reason for that is science has proved to be very useful. It's proved repeatable. It's proved dependable. It's given us a lot of comforts and luxuries. It's helped us in
Yes.
many ways, in our medicine, in our food, in our technology, in every sort of which way. So, but the unfortunate thing is, when something has proven dependable and has a good track record, right?
Hmm.
Um, Let me put it this way. Do you know, you're very into music, right? So this
Yes.
this
Yes.
analogy comes very naturally to me for this podcast. But there's a phenomena. I don't know if you've ever played like a string instrument. I've actually tried playing the cello. I'm not a cellist by
Oh,
any
wow.
means, but I've tried playing the cello.
Hmm.
And my teacher, when he was teaching me the cello, he said, you have to be very careful when you're, learning the chords and everything, because what can happen is you can be so in tune with your own playing, but completely out of tune with the actual note,
Mm.
right? Right, you need to make sure that you're tuned to the actual note and not to your instrument. Otherwise, the moment you join like a symphony or an orchestra, you're out of tune with the entire band.
Right.
Right. So I like to say that's kind of what has happened to science in a way. On its own, individually, it's in tune with itself. So it sounds like everything kind of makes sense. But when you look at it at a worldwide level, you start to see discordance. You start to see that there is a lack of tune
Hmm.
that doesn't really match with a lot of lived experience from people. Right.
Cognitive dissonance is what comes to mind.
Yes, that is definitely one of the things with our mental health problems, right? With cognitive dissonance, we have huge amount of anxiety, this huge prevalence of depression. We see for the first time in a first world, right, that our quality of life has actually gone down. We've seen that our
Yes.
um, usually we see an increase in our life expectancy. We've seen a decrease, right? We're seeing all these things because suicide rates in the younger
Yes.
generation is higher than ever before.
Yes, it
We're
is.
when at the same time, we're seeing like people are talking about mental health. There's this huge stigma that's being released. So there's less stigma in terms of getting mental health treatments and talking about your mental health. But we see the opposite, that mental health problems are increasing, they're growing and at a rapid rate, right? And we actually
Yes.
notice that the drugs that we have for mental health problems, right? We've met people who after so long of being on, like, drugs for their depression and everything like that, when they're finally ready to try and get off of it, you don't know the amount of, severe symptoms and severe repercussions it has on your neurotransmitters and on your health
Right.
when you're even trying to get off of a drug. So it's a clear indication that it's not an answer. It's not a solution to the problem. It's more of a maintenance. It's when we've gone so far in a destructive way that we're trying everything to just hold it together. That's like kind of like what the drugs are from modern science and medicine for a lot of our mental health problems. And so I think they have their place, and they definitely help people, especially when they don't have another option. But I also feel it's an indication that we don't have all the proper answers as well, that we're lacking answers.
Yes, and you hit something. It was an interesting point that you made when you come off of those drugs, because I know even in the advertisements, and they whiz by them when you see them on television. But one of the main warnings you get from or on the prescription or in the information is to not stop taking the pharmaceutical or the drug like cold turkey. Just stop, because of the side effects that can occur. And that's really interesting. There were a couple of things that you were talking about, how the awareness of mental health and the importance of mental health and everything that we're doing to take the stigma away from it. And it's gone up. It's counterintuitive that it just doesn't make sense how that could be, but yet it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's a clear indication. If there was a solution, you wouldn't see it increase. You wouldn't see the problems
Right.
raise. You wouldn't see, right, when we finally have an answer for, like, for example, bacterial infection, you take the drug, it's gone. Right? You don't
Hmm.
continue to take the drug to make it go away. So if this is a real biological issue, you would take the drug and you would see it go away. You wouldn't be dependent upon the drug to function. Right? And so you see, like, and this is just one of the many issues we see in the worldwide level. We're seeing issues with our agricultural system, right? We've reached a point, we're using so many drugs, we're using so many toxic chemicals,
Yes.
right, in our food, and hormones, and production of agriculture, like animals and chicken and poultry and eggs. We're seeing this increase in the amount of fumigation. Like my husband, right, he's the founder of this, he's my guru, but he was telling me about when he was born and raised in India, right? He saw all the farmers, right, the most organic crops without adding any outside chemicals.
Right.
That's how they
Beautiful.
were doing the crops there in India at that time. It's gotten so bad that you can't create a crop. He said the farmers that wouldn't fumigate, who would do everything organically, naturally, now are forced to fumigate just to produce the same crops like they did over a decade ago. So
That's so sad to hear that. And it's burned up the nutrients in our soil, which makes it near impossible to sustain that agricultural way. You just can't do that.
no, we're living in such a way that it's absolutely unsustainable for us to continue. And this trajectory that we're going, we're headed towards failure. We're seeing the development of superbugs, and we've done even, testing. We've done scientific experiments on administering this blessing or this, divine energy on both bacteria as well as uh, the drugs themselves, to show that when you actually target things at the level of consciousness, you can make the bacteria finally respond to drugs that they have become resistant to.
Hmm.
So we're showing things that can advance the future of medicine and technology in ways that we have found limitations, where we have reached ceilings, where we have reached, what we consider a peak, and we're not able to go beyond that peak in our science and our technology. That's where consciousness is able to extend, transcend that peak, go to a next level. We're able to reach higher potential. We're able to solve all the pressing problems, right? We like back to the agricultural crops.
Yes,
What
thank
we've
you. I wanted
seen,
to go back to that.
I
Thank
know
you.
it's such an important thing too, because A lot of our health problems too, a lot of it is coming from one of two things I'd like to say. One of the most prevalent things, right, is coming from a disordered, disorganized state of mind, right? And I'll get back to that. And I'd like to
Hmm.
explain that a little further. But the next part of that, I would say, is our toxic environment, right?
Yes.
That is one of the leading causes of, some of the major chronic illnesses and inflammatory based diseases that we see today. We're seeing children, we're seeing girls at the age of 6 get their menstrual cycles
Oh my God.
because of the quality of our food. It takes decades to produce 1 inch of, topsoil, and we're
Hmm.
completely eradicating that with just a couple fumigations. We're getting rid of decades of essential nutrients within our soil after just a couple of fumigations, just to be able to produce the amount of crop that we need to feed the world. It's impossible to go completely organic without using all these chemicals because we cannot feed the population that we have without them. If these crops fail us, we don't have a backup food reserve to feed us longer than a few months, right?
Wow.
We are at the risk of losing crops because we're no longer able to produce them sustainably. And so this is where our scientific research really shines as well, not just in addition to human health, but this is also something that's so important because what we see is we've done many, many experiments on agricultural crops, and we're talking acreage, not like, a plant in our backyard or anything like
Right.
that. We're talking proper acreage, regulated, strict, controlled scientific studies with third party, scientific institutes. And what we found, and universities as well, universities and institutions, we have a control as well as a treated. And in the control, we're using all the best conventional methods that we have to produce that crop. Whatever we have to be able to eradicate the pests, the viruses and the bacteria, and give the greatest yield and quality of crop. We're using all those conventional methods on the control group. On the treated group, we're using nothing, which is considered impossible, right? The crops
Hmm.
would fail if you did nothing to them. And for the treated groups, all we're doing is planting them in the soil, adding water, and using the grace of God and the sun. And that's it. And we're seeing greater yield in those crops.
Wow.
We're seeing greater immunity, greater nutrition. We're seeing huge differences by comparison to the most conventional methodologies that we have available. We have yields increasing by as much as 500% by comparison to conventional methods. We've seen increases in immunity by like 600%. We've seen like shelf life, for example, in cashews, our shelf life has doubled. It's increased by as much as 100%.
Can I ask
We,
something really quickly?
please.
And I'm sorry if I'm sorry to interrupt. I find all of this fascinating. So I'm curious, and I'm confident I know what the answer is, but why aren't we getting on this bandwagon?
What do you mean?
What I mean by this, if this is as successful as you're saying, why aren't we doing it now? Aside from your experiments, you know what I mean? So the large corporate or industrial farmlands that are, and I don't want to say any names because I don't want to get in trouble, but there are large conglomerates that are agricultural companies that are out there. And I live in the Midwest in Illinois. So you go through Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, and you see, I grew up in a farming community. So each row or every 5 rows or 10 rows, there's going to be a sign on the front. And that's who is either owns it or is the seed or the chemicals that are used. And we're talking thousands of acres of this going on. So my question is, and I hope it makes sense to you, is if this is so good, so positive, and so impactful, why in God's name aren't we doing it?
There are two answers to that question. The first one is we are.
Well, I mean, not you. I mean, yeah, I know you are, but why aren't the big farms doing it?
We are.
You are.
Yes, we are. That's the second answer. We are. No.
Okay. I know you are.
No.
I
We are
gotcha.
and we are.
Oh, the big we are. Okay, good. Well, that makes me feel a little better knowing that, because I'm just like, it's starting to get depressing. I'm going, oh my gosh, let's say something positive. Oh my gosh, let's go positive. And there is positive in what you're
Yeah.
saying, but and I'm sorry, it's probably not hidden to a lot of people, but I think maybe it is still what
It is.
your work you're doing.
Well, here's the thing. We've spent decades of scientific research, and we're strong supporters because my husband, he's the founder, like I said, my guru, but his whole mission and his whole purpose of pursuing scientific research was he saw the void of scientific research in the spiritual community. He saw the lack of integrity. He actually um, had a great foundation in India when he left India and pursued scientific research, because he was performing what you would call miracles already. He was performing, and he's already in a society that would well accept him, right? We're talking India here. There's a lot of
Sure.
gurus in India, so he'd be well accepted. It would be like a normal thing in India to be a guru and bless people. And he left all that to come to the West, where it's a lot more nuanced. There's a lot more rigors of science and acceptance
Politics
and
and everything
politics
else.
and all these other things involved. But he had a great reputation already. He was already well known by all the Bollywood industry, by all the actors and actresses, by great producers and distributors, politicians, senators, right? He had connections to everybody. He was performing miracles for these people. So he didn't need to leave all that behind, but he did for the sake of his own integrity, to consider that, are these miracles, right? What is the limit? What can I say is actually a result of the blessing versus the result of psychology and placebo? So his whole path was a path of integrity, which is why he spent the last couple of decades, almost 3 decades now, and spent literally millions of dollars of his own money, his own hard-earned money and his own earned money, to make sure that we have enough of a foundation of scientific studies and research to say that what we're doing is real, that what we're doing is evidence-based, not psychological, not story, not anecdotal. We have so many testimonials, literally, like in terms of our resources of great outcomes, not just the scientific research, but the amount of testimonials we have, people claiming huge miracles in their lives. But even in regards to that, he still wanted the science, because there are not a lot of people out there who claim to have these abilities, who claim supernatural power, who are in the realm of spirituality or healing or any of these categories, who actively pursue scientific research. So our whole purpose was, before we started marketing and telling the entire world about this and seeming more like a fraud, seeming more like somebody who's purely pseudoscience alone, we wanted enough of a stronghold of scientific evidence, as well as we wanted to get those clinical trials, which we just recently did over the last few years. We completed those 4 clinical trials we did, but we wanted to have a substantial database of scientific research so that we could credibly say to everybody, this is what this energy can and can't do, with full accuracy. So for our own integrity as an organization, and for the integrity of the people that we are delivering this message to, that's why we have waited to share this message with the world. And then second to that is, when I said we are doing this, what I mean by that is we are currently working with a multi-billion-dollar organization. I won't name names in the same way you don't name names.
Right.
But we are currently working, and we're actually we're conducting experiments. Currently, we were doing things in agriculture, but what we're currently actively working on is chicken. We're working in broilers and egg production, and we're working with I'm not talking about like a tiny little farm, local farm near us in Texas. I'm talking about like an international, or at least the very least nationally known, well-known brand name. And so this we're currently in like the trial phase, but and here's the thing, because no matter how much science you have, there will always be the stigma. And that's why I say science is
Oh,
the
yes.
new religion of the world, because a lot of science is in tune with itself. It's running on assumptions, right? Instead of where the evidence leads. And where all of our evidence leads is that consciousness is the fundamental reality. But sometimes, in despite of all of the scientific research, you still have people who say this can't be real, right? Even
Yes.
when the data
Yes.
speaks for itself. So we found a way to go and bypass that kind of conversation with these people. And so we are, finding a way to target the blessing. But here's the thing, these organizations, they don't care what you do as long as you produce an outcome and it's safe for consumers.
Right. Business.
That's
Right.
business. And so with our targeted approach, we see that potentially their income, their net profits as a company will increase by billions of dollars, because we're increasing their egg production, we're decreasing their mortality rates in their
Mm,
chickens, we're creating things that is viable for them as an organization. And for consumers, we're creating, we've conducted tests with like Eurofins. We've done many analytical samples with them, and we're seeing the changes in our chicken and our poultry and our eggs, and as well as many other food products we've been testing. We've seen great increases in like nutrition, in omega fatty acids. We're seeing things that
positive things that are
science
what
can't
we were looking at.
increase. We're seeing huge benefits without all the toxicity and things that are required to produce that kind of food. So
Gotcha.
we're increasing the health for consumers. And now also, as a result, the consumers, without even knowing they're getting a blessed product or not, they're getting a little impact from the blessing in their lives as well. So we are also bypassing the psychology of consumers when they hear the word blessing and they tune out and they deflect and
Sure.
go somewhere else. It's another way of basically acting like a carrier for the blessing, is by producing these products. So we are currently in the trial phase, but we're producing so much for this organization that it's a very likelihood that they're going to say yes, and we're going to be collaborating together.
Good. And I hope that works. I want to touch on two things, and then we'll get to the musical questions. The first would be the, oh, doggone it. I just drew a blank. I can't believe that. I'm usually not at a loss for words. Oh, now I remember. Oh, sorry. The science-based fact of everything that we're discussing right now, you're 100% right. And I can attest to that, because for the longest time, I wouldn't, yeah, I guess I'd probably say woo woo. Oh, that's woo woo, or that's, whatever. And it wasn't until somebody brought science into it that really had me, it opened the door for me for the possibility. And once it opened the door of possibility for me, and I'm just like anybody else, things really took off. And I realized that there was so much more that I thought I knew. You think you know a lot, but it's what you're told, and not always what you see, because you're told, oh, that can't work. That's just hocus pocus. That's just mumbo jumbo, whatever it is. But until you see it for yourself, and then you're one of them. You know what I mean? Then you're one of those wackadoos too, until science comes in and says, hold on there. Wait just a minute. We've got some proof to back this up. And I think that in and of itself is a game changer for acceptance. I really, truly do. And I am so glad your husband, you, and your organization had the foresight as well as the fortitude to do what you're doing, knowing full well that that's going to be the pushback, especially in the Western world, because there is so much money attached to pharmaceuticals. Big pharma will squash things. Chemical companies, large chemical companies will squash things.
Mm.
Things that are better alternatives get squashed because it takes away from their bottom line. And I am so happy that you're doing what you're doing. The second thing is we've mentioned now blessings a number of times. And I was fortunate enough to be a recipient from your husband and yourself to receive a blessing.
Yeah,
And I'd like it I'd like you to take just a moment to explain to everyone what we're talking about
of
with the
course.
blessing.
So, can you explain to me what would you like me to?
Well, you kind of hit it on you touched on it. I'd be happy to explain. It makes perfect sense in my mind, but I wouldn't want to be in here too long. You might get lost. Um, you had mentioned in religion, let's just say Catholicism, and I'm not bashing Catholicism, but there's holy water, there's the incense that gets swung around, there's all these different things, the dogma that's attached to a blessing that you have to be present for to experience that. And we're not talking about having to be present for your blessing. We're also not talking about someone repeating a phrase from the Bible or a chapter from the Bible when they're giving this blessing. So, with your blessings and your husband's blessings, can you describe what that is for people that might be going, okay, she keeps saying blessings and blessings and blessings. What is she talking about? What is a blessing
Of course.
from you?
Yeah. I mean, for a blessing, this is how I would put it, is when we go into let's break down, right, what exactly we're doing when we're administering a blessing. So the blessing is
Thank
just
you.
the process, okay? It is when we're talking about blessing, like I told you before, it's not a symbolic act. It's not a process necessarily like a technique or like something that you even need to participate in. Because as I was saying, the members, like the volunteers from the clinical trial, like some of them didn't even know, what they were getting. They had no idea that they were getting a blessing. They had no idea which group was what, right? And similarly, when we get into agriculture, when we get into materials and cells, none of these things have a belief system. None of these things can sit and meditate or pray or do the normal
Right.
processes that we talk about when we're talking about receiving a spiritual blessing or something from that nature. What I'm talking about is like the equivalent of when you administer an antibiotic, right? Even when the patient is unconscious, it still has an effect,
Mm, yes.
right? That's a sign that if it's an objective thing that has a real impact, why should it need your belief or your faith for it to work?
Yes.
Right. And so, same thing we've seen across all of our studies. This does not depend on faith and belief. This is an objective reality. And so, what exactly is happening with the blessing? We get back into the different stories with science, religion, and spirituality, and we go into what actually makes things work for us, what
Hmm.
actually brings vitality, brings good health, brings mental clarity and peace. We have the peace of science, right? That out of tune and only in tune with itself, right? Where it says that the mind produces consciousness, that it's everything is limited to the brain, the mind, and the body, that there's
Hmm.
nothing outside of that. It's a very materialistic based view of life, very matter derivative. And then we're going into religion, which believes in the soul and believes that the soul has influence over our reality. And then we get into spirituality, which labels it more as consciousness, that consciousness has
Right.
influence over our reality. So that's what I'm saying. We're all of these things are playing different notes. They're playing different, melodies, or they're playing different harmonies. And they don't know that when you put them all together, they're actually in perfect harmony with each other. That they're actually in complete, perfect chords, right?
Hmm.
When they all are played together and in sync. And the way that we're doing that is by saying that consciousness, when consciousness is altered, consciousness has influence over the mind, and as a result, influence over the body. Matter is
Hmm.
derived of consciousness, like what Max Planck said. So you influence consciousness and everything else changes as a byproduct of that. So
Hmm.
consciousness, when your consciousness is in a lower state or a lower vibration, what ends up happening is you see your mind is in mental chaos. It's in havoc.
Yes.
There's a lot more thoughts going on. Science doesn't know, where these thoughts come from. It thinks the mind generates the thoughts, but it doesn't know why, doesn't know where thoughts come from or what thoughts are, what their real nature is, right? Which is why it can't really properly target any mental related problems fully and effectively
Hmm.
because it truly doesn't understand the mind yet. And so we have a lower state of consciousness means that the mind is out of control. The mind is in a state of chaos. We are enslaved by our own minds. And so this is kind of like this huge discordance within our entire being, this huge dissonance with, consciousness and our minds and our bodies. This creates, mental restlessness, anxiety, depression. This is what,
Disease.
disease. It leads to disease within the body
Hmm.
as well, discordance within the body as well as the mind. And when consciousness raises for an individual, we see that consciousness from a higher level has the ability to command the mind, which is why after people receive these blessings, the most common things that they report is that they enter into immediate calmness, immediate peace. They find their thoughts quiet. They find that their sleep is deeper because now when their mind is quieter, now their ability to rest and recharge increases, their ability to absorb, their bioavailability increases, they absorb more from from their food, right? In the same way in the
Hmm.
clinical trials, we see all of these things start to improve their health, their relationships. It's like, I like to give an example of the importance of oxygen in a person's life. Oxygen is invisible, right? We can't
Yes.
really see its effects, but we can feel it. And this is kind of how science treats consciousness, and how our modern day and age treats consciousness, or the grace of God in our lives. When we don't know that oxygen is important and vital for our lives, we don't understand how essential it is for us, we start to blame other things when we're in an oxygen deprived state. When our oxygen is low, we see that there's an overall system failure within our body. It
Yes.
starts off with emotional discord. We start to have emotional swings. We start to not feel very well. We feel there's something off. We can't quite pinpoint what it is. We just know we're very frustrated. We're agitated. We're, depressed. We have a lot of mental restlessness. Then we see our mental cognitive abilities start to decline with oxygen deprivation. So our ability to think clearly, make the right decisions, our ability to make choices and choose between two options and know which one's the better option, our
Yes.
ability to discern and discriminate, and our ability to have full integrity within our lives and full command over our thoughts and our decisions and our choices starts to fail us as well. And then after that, we see that, it leads to disharmony within our relationships, right? We start to blame our partners. We start to blame the food
Yes.
we
Yes.
eat,
Yes.
right? When our
Hmm.
bodies start to fail next, we start to blame that, we're not eating the right foods, or all the foods we're eating, there's something wrong with it. We start to blame everything outside of the real source of the problem, which is hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. And so, in the same way, when you look at the entire world and everything that humanity is facing, even on an individual level, if you look at your individual lives and you see mental restlessness, discord, inability to manage your own thought and your own mind, you have no command over your thoughts, and you see discord in your relationships, you see lack of harmony here, you see, you're not able to make decisions, you can't pick the right choice anymore, right? You're full of anxiety, depression. All of these things are indicative of a lower state of consciousness, meaning less of the grace of God in our
Hmm.
lives. And so, because science has created this matter, lens by which we see life, we no longer know where the problem is. We don't know it's coming at the level of consciousness. So we're literally blaming everybody else. We're blaming our relationships. We're blaming our diets. We're blaming our bodies, right? We're blaming our minds. We're blaming things and trying to treat them with no real viable solution that exists out there because the problems are increasing, right? So that's what I mean by an
Right.
overall systems failure, is because we're facing a spiritual hypoxia. We don't know that consciousness is actually the thing that gives rise to vitality. It gives us command over our minds and our thoughts. It gives us well-being, peace. It gives us good quality health. It gives us the greater ability to absorb and detoxify our bodies. It is the one thing that regulates everything. And so when we ignore that vital and integral part of our lives, we suffer and we blame everything else aside from the thing that's causing the suffering,
Right.
which is why we're so stuck in processes. There are so many things available out there. We're so stuck in modalities and process, and my method is better than your method, instead of actually targeting things at the level of the divine. And so
Hmm.
this is where the enlightened consciousness comes in. Enlightened consciousness basically meaning that it's someone who is basically in that constant state of connection with divine 24/7. They have that special access, we could say. They are, completely connected all the time. And like I said, it's their reasonable prayer, their reasonable intention. They request the divine, that authority, which is the administrator of consciousness. It's the creator. It's the source of life. It sustains. It gets rid of life. It does all of that. It's the one thing that governs everything. So if you want to change creation, you go to the creator, which is
Right.
why enlightened consciousness, their consciousness has evolved to the point where they are, we could say, an extension of the creator. They are completely and 100% connected. So based on their reasonable request, their reasonable prayer, what happens is the blessing is simply this connection. It's establishing this connection again. It's like a jumper cable. It connects the recipient back to the creator, back to the grace of God, back to higher levels of consciousness that makes things happen, that makes you function at a higher level. It not
Hmm.
only fixes breakdown, it optimizes potential. You go to a doctor, you want to think better, you want to improve your life, you have no problems, but you want to go to the next level. Doctors have nothing for that, which
That's
is
right.
another limitation of science. We can't increase potential. We can't reach to new heights in potential. The enlightened masters can. You go to an enlightened master, they say, yes, that's simple. God can do that. Consciousness can do that. Raise your consciousness, you raise your potential. You change your fate and fortune. You change your trajectory in life. So the blessing is more of the process by which the enlightened being is making a request and God is answering that prayer and raising the consciousness of the recipient.
So, okay. I've got so many more questions, and doggone it, we're just about out of time. I think we may need to have another episode if you're up for it, because there are so many things that I didn't even get to that your organization is involved with. And so we we have about 3 minutes to do some musical questions, and it's part of every show. And if anyone's ever listened, they understand that it's the third pillar of our show, and it's an opportunity for me to ask the guest some questions. So can I do that really quickly? We can
Absolutely.
run through some.
Yes.
Okay. So what was the first song you fell in love with from the radio?
Ooh, from the radio. How about the first song I fell in love with in general?
That will work.
Okay. So I actually love this musical segment. I'll put it this way. I have a very musical family. My father was an opera
It's
singer,
choir
right?
director
He
too.
toured internationally. My mother was also, a singer. So I grew up on classical music. I grew up on a wide different variety and genres. But I think the thing that really stuck with me the most is my mother, in her beautiful soprano voice, she would always sing to me before sleep. There was something beautiful involved in those songs. It was about God. Every song that I listened to growing up was always When it was about love, for me, it was always about the love of God, because that's the strongest love I felt in my life. It overrode any other type of love I ever felt. So these are a bunch of bhajans that I grew up with, and they're songs about God. And basically, like, one of them is like door of my heart,
Mm,
open wide I keep for thee, wilt thou come, just for once come to me. So it's like songs that spoke to my soul sick heart, yearning for God. And then
that's beautiful.
but I would like to say I have a little unconventional answer for you for
Okay.
this music segment. That perhaps the most profound music that I know of, right? And I love music. It's such a vital part of my life, and it's like I have a whole soundtrack for my life. But what I found with all these bhajans, with every time my dad would host like a symphony orchestra or like a band, or like he would lead choirs and singing. Whenever I would attend those programs, I would listen to that. People feel wonderful with these things. It helps
Yes.
alleviate, it helps bring them peace and calmness and joy, happiness. It helps kind of give them something in their lives when they listen to this music.
Mhm.
And for me, I felt that I like rode the highs of that. But then what was so much more powerful at the end of that is what I call silence. It's when you've ridden the highs of those music, you've reached the climax, you've gone through the swells, you've gone and ridden the music to the very end. And there's a point between the last note and
And the pause.
right before people clap.
Yes. Yes. I know that stunned silence.
And it reminds me of many moments in my life, especially my childhood. Oh, I can't stop crying.
It's okay.
Where that silence, that's the music of God. That's the language God speaks, is that resonant silence. Because in that silence, it's the end of that song and the beginning of another.
Mm,
it's it's the magnitude of eternity and nothingness all at once. It's pure potentiality, it's eternity. Everything exists in that pause, in that silence. Everything and nothing all at once. And you lose yourself in it, but you gain everything in it. And so, for me, no matter what it was, every time I listened to a bhajan, I would be overwhelmed, full of that love, that ecstatic love of God. And then afterwards, the most profound moment was when I rode that song into the silence. And I felt like the greatest relief, the greatest joy, the greatest love that I felt, even more than the music I listened to, even greater than my heart's call to God, was the music of the divine in that silence. So for me, that's the greatest, most potent music of my life that I've had the pleasure and honor to enjoy, is the sound of silence, is the beauty of divine, the harmonies, the melody of it, the beauty of it, the symphony, the orchestra, the beauty of divine putting everything into motion and suspending everything from motion in that single moment of silence. That was probably the most powerful first song I ever knew.
that I love your description. That's one of the biggest reasons I have music as part of the podcast, because I truly believe that music, people talk about the God particle, right? Everybody has the God particle. You have the piece of God inside of you. I believe that music is that, a piece of that. And it is within that particle that binds everyone together because of the frequency, because of the harmony, because of everything that you mentioned. It can make people forget all their worries, all their concerns and troubles and pain in that moment. And they've forgotten about it. And they're just there. And they're looking at you, waiting. And it's really a magnificent happening, I guess. It's an experience, it's an event, it's something that I don't know that a lot of people recognize it, but I know a lot of people feel it. Exactly what you're talking about, that silence. They're just as if they don't know what to do. They've just seen, without getting too out there, it's as if you had just heard or seen God speak or looked into God's eyes and don't know what to say. So you say nothing and you do nothing and you're just kind of in awe of it. Every once in a while you have those performances like that where people are just stunned in stunned silence. And that's a wonderful perspective. As a matter of fact, you know what? I'm not going to ask another single question about music. What you just described right there was the epitome of why everything, the musical section that is in a piece of every one of our podcasts. So thank you for that wonderful, wonderful answer. It was quite moving, by the way, and I appreciate that.
I thought what you said was incredibly beautiful and moving as well. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, it's
Truly,
heartfelt.
sincerely.
Well, it's just about time to cue the music for today's episode, but don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the Drop the Needle podcast to stay up to date on our latest episodes. I'd also like to take a moment to thank everyone again for tuning in today, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Drop the Needle podcast. I'd also like to thank our very special guest, Dahryn Trivedi, for being on our show today. Dahryn, can you please do me a favor and tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you and your organization?
Absolutely. Everything is available through our website, divineconnection.org. That's our nonprofit, Divine Connection International. We have, all the memberships. We have, all the signs, our publications, everything's available there. You can sign up for a mailing list, stay up to date. We're also all over social media. You can visit Dahryn Trivedi for our social media or Real Divine Connection. And we also have a special offer for, everybody who's a part of your podcast, is that we're offering a huge discount on these blessings. So if they want to visit divineconnection.org/DTN podcast for Drop the Needle podcast. So divineconnection.org/DTN podcast. They can try out the blessings for themselves, see how they feel. It's at a huge discount for, first time people. All the money, everything goes to, us advancing this mission. And, we are grateful for everybody who participates, and I can't wait to see everybody's journeys unfold. We look forward to it.
That is beautiful, and thank you. And I'll make sure that that's in the show notes. So I'm going to invite everyone to head on over to the show notes where there's going to be a link. And by the way, I'm going to get Dahryn's answers to the musical questions so we can put together the playlist for today's episode, as well as all of the contact information and the link to what Dahryn had mentioned, giving people this gift for the blessings. All right, my Drop the Needle posse, like Billy Joel says, from the highs to the lows to the end of the show, this is the end of our show. Until next time, this is Jim Alstott wishing you infinite health, happiness, and the perfect playlist for your life. Thank you again for being the best part of us. Catch you next time.